you agree, what I would like to do, since there's been long statements in this previous panel,
half an hour more.
we probably instead of having only one question and 10 minutes, maybe two rounds, so two questions, 5 minutes each. 5-6 minutes.
Okay.
Right? It's okay for you.
Yeah, the question is in the paper or what question?
Well, no, I would like to I would like to ask you, because the idea is that small questions.
Opening remarks.
And then I maybe if you. I was thinking to ask you. I tell you, so you tell me if it is feasible for you. To ask you a first question about how democratization can lead to economic reform, obviously with specific reference to Egypt, if you want, but of course otherwise you want to enlarge the reasoning to the old main countries to prepare.
Yeah, I would like to talk about this, but I have to confess something to you. I've been listening since yesterday, a lot of interesting things.
Yes.
And I had some reflections on it related to this institution's part.
You can put inside, yes.
Yeah. It's okay with you?
Yes, okay. It's okay. And the second question is, tell me if you like, or maybe we can do first this part, economic, and then the reflections, but maybe the second question was if Arab socialism and Muslim Brotherhood are the two main, let's say, issues on the table in this area, how the development of these issues, or the combined, or the match, or we should choose.
Arab socialism, which is, you mean the regional, the
yes,
Nasser proposition?
Yes.
Okay. And the Muslim
Brotherhood.
Okay.
Do you think you can elaborate on this?
It's a very interesting question. I can respond to that. I didn't have it in mind, but it's an interesting question.
Either you, if you prefer, you can elaborate on the comments, maybe in a second step. You prefer.
Yes.
Okay. So I first make the question about economics, and then in the second round the comments on what you heard. All right?
Okay.
You are in
No. In fact, I want to come to you.
Hello. Buongiorno.
Maybe I want to ask you arrotolati. Allora no, la prima che volevo fare è se si parla, stiamo parlando, magari vorrei iniziare con lei,
Come va?
più ampio, parliamo di parlare di evoluzione Arab Spring, ma c'è un tema che oggi macro, la guerra con la crisi. Allora, c'è un punto di vista su
How are you?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We met before, but I was wondering. You look exactly. How are you? Good to see you here. I know. It's okay. I know. Lots of nice, interesting people also. Excellent. And I yesterday very informed.
quasi di politica internazionale, la gestione delle nostre una domandona, poi dopo
Una domandona, io credo che le farò una distinzione tra quello che si può fare a breve un po' grave.
la seconda domanda che devo fare perché la Arab Spring perché non si sono tradotti le Arab Spring hanno funzionato in tutto il mondo
Nothing new. But I like about it.
Even if you
Non domande alle quali non ha risposto.
queste sono risposte avevo fatto risalti
we need to be pragmatic. They just don't get the people who have any kind of.
I like you. I like you. The one that went to Brussels. Excellent. tonight. I met her in Cairo for dinner before she became she struck me also as a new type of leader. Just like the Prime Minister, a new generation of leaders.
First, since I start with the wider
Okay, thanks for coming.
That the nation states do not give up, even in this critical situation. Sovereignty.
The member states.
The member states, yes.
I was going to talk a bit about the kind of the title of the session, democracy building. What does it actually require? Like, can it be whether the member states or the EU contribution? Just to fill in this, other lessons from the trajectory of the I can address your question for different member states.
Maybe I can make this as a second question, the one, if you like, the one about the national states in Europe, European integration. We can make it a second question. And make the first as the first. Do you want to elaborate on what in this first question?
This question is other lessons learned from Europe's can the outside countries
Come va? Buongiorno. Marina OTTAWAY. Marina sia sana, dovrei dire, in questo paese dovrei. Grazie.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. Siamo pronti?
Sì, siamo pronti.
Arriviamo. Tanto durerà a lungo.
Okay, good afternoon. I had been asked the Italians to speak Italian and the other to speak English, but since I do not see enough headphones, so I think we'll go with English if everybody agrees. So that was a theoretical suggestion. So we have with me a representative, I would say, of different areas of the world. I could say United States, Egypt, Europe, if Europe exists, and one important representative of institutions, because BONINO, that you all know, has covered all, I would say, the possible environments in the institutional world, the national environment, as you know, the European environment, and so I think she may close our roundtable that, by the way, I will try to make as lively as possible, asking my speakers to give not very long answer to my questions in order to have a couple of possibilities to involve them, and then also to involve you in the with a small debate, since we are supposed to go until 6 o'clock. That means we almost recovered the overall hour and a half that we were supposed to have. Let me open with Marina OTTAWAY, that is a senior scholar, as you know, from Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington, D.C. And she has deepened and elaborated researches on the Arab world. Of course, we are supposed to go through what is now left after the Arab Springs, but nobody may hide that on the table we have a more general political scenario that has to be faced before going into single countries. That is the crisis in Syria and Iraq that has brought about the ISIS menace to our communities, to our civilization. We have also read in these days hundreds of opinions about which should be the way to face ISIS, and so it's difficult to have a definite idea. I would like to ask Marina if one of these ideas she finds feasible, or what she finds feasible. For example, among the many, there is some that are pretending to the necessity of having the famous boots on the ground to face there in Iraq and Syria the opposition to ISIS, and maybe afterwards having a general conference of peace where probably we have to redraw the borders of these countries after World War I, and this in the short term. But of course, in the mid and long, the necessity as well to promote political, economic, social reforms, maybe economic assistance in these areas in order to promote development, but also the necessity, as President Renzi has underlined yesterday here, to consider the marginalization of the peripheries in our big cities in Europe as a foreign policy issue more than an internal policy issue. So, please, Marina.
Thank you for the invitation. I am not going to say thank you for the question because it's a huge question and I have 5 minutes to talk about it. I would answer it by, first of all, by keeping saying that we have to understand what ISIS is. And I think it's important to keep in mind that it has 3 different components or 3 different aspects, if you want. One is ISIS as the Islamic State. That is an entity that seeks to control and govern a certain territory. Second, there is ISIS as a network of radical organizations affiliated. It's never quite clear how more closely, less closely with the caliphate, with al-Baghdadi, if you want. And the third is what I have called in an article, for lack of a better term, and I still can't find a better term, ISIS as a state of mind. That is, those, the attraction that the idea of ISIS poses for marginalized young people throughout the world. And I think the 3 aspects of ISIS do require different approaches. And I think it's very dangerous to confuse the 3. There is no way we are going to combat ISIS as the Islamic State by political and economic reforms that are trying to integrate alienated young people living in the peripheries of Europe or of their own countries into the system. Giving jobs to young people in the peripheries of France is not going to put an end to the Islamic State as a territorial entity. And I think towards ISIS as a territorial entity, the military intervention has to be part of the equation. And I think boots on the ground have to be part of the equation. The big question there, of course, is whose boots are going to be on the ground. And what we are, because the idea at this point of putting Europeans and Americans, particularly Americans, boots in the ground, is not only not very acceptable at home. I think in the United States there is no desire, whatever the Republican candidates may be saying now that they don't have to make the decision, sending Americans to fight in Iraq and in Syria, once again, it's not in the cards. But even if it could be done from the point of view of domestic politics in these countries, I don't think it would be accepted in the countries where these boots are supposed to be put. I can't remember which one it was, but one or two of the Shia militias in Iraq have already announced that they will fight against any American that is deployed to that country, and I would take that threat very seriously because I think they are going to do it. So the question I think there is what combination. Who is it that the international community, for lack of a better word, can assist in terms of developing the ground forces, the people who can fight, essentially, because bombing is certainly part of the equation, but at some point, somebody has to occupy the ground, and the question is who is in a position to do that. And here, I think it becomes very important for all the countries that are trying to devise a strategy, is to say, what are our priorities? Because, for example, there is a great deal of reluctance, not so much in Europe, but certainly on the part of the United States, to support the Kurds. Because in the end, the United States does not support the idea of a Kurdish secession. Well, the Kurds have proven at this point, the ones that are most determined and most successful as troops on the ground, so that if, in fact, we continue not to assist them as much as we could, it's not going to help in defeating ISIS. So I think there is a question here of choices. There is a question of what the priorities are. Let me move, because time is moving very fast, to the other two aspects of ISIS. The networks. These networks that exist, that have developed, and they keep on changing shape. I think I'm glad that I'm not part of the intelligence services, because I think it's a thankless task at this point to try to figure out exactly who is affiliated with whom, who really takes order from Baghdadi or from ISIS, and who is operating more or less on their own, and then ISIS claims success whenever they do something that ISIS likes. I think concerning this network, the work is mostly one of intelligence to begin with, and intelligence sharing. And I think if there is a message there, we have to do much better. The European countries, the United States, the Arab countries, frankly, Russia and Iran. They really have to make a concerted effort to share intelligence, to share information, because this is an enormously complicated puzzle that has to be put together. It's not a question of putting boots on the ground at this point, because I think these networks are far too vague, far too elusive in many ways to bomb them or to put boots on the ground. So this is a fairly long-term strategy. It has to start now, and it has to, but it has to be pursued very, very, very seriously. And finally, there is the third aspect, what I call the ISIS as a state of mind, which I think is really the marginalization of so many people, both in Europe, less so in the United States. The Arabs in the United States are not very marginalized, not because it risks becoming that way in the future, but more because of what kind of Arab population there is in the United States. Because it's not so much the disinherited Arabs that coming from the Maghreb that you find in France, that you find in Europe. They are people with a different level of education, so that in many ways they are much better integrated in the society. And I don't say because US follow different policies. But this problem of alienation is, I would argue, it's a very very, very long-term and difficult problem to solve, because if the problem of how you educate the kids coming from the bottom of the society, the problem of how you find jobs, particularly in economies where there are not many jobs, is one that has to start now, but we should have no illusions that we are going to solve it anytime soon. And above all, there is no, we shouldn't have any illusion that if we provide that we can try to de-radicalize people who are already radicalized by providing jobs and training. This is a question, it's more of a preventative measure that is going to go on for a long time. So let me stop here because I have gone well over my 5 minutes already.
It's okay, thank you very much. It was very interesting, your analysis. Let's maybe now switch from the general view to the local view, if we may say. Local, having a glance on the MENA region by an economic point of view. This is the point, the last point that Marina has made. Now I want to involve Sherif EL-DIWANY, Executive Director of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, and start from the analysis that the MENA region now is stagnating. Low oil prices, escalation of conflict, civil wars are for sure affecting growth recovery. I have read one figure for all of the World Bank that estimates for the region the GDP growth to stay around 2.8% in 2015. That is much lower than predicted 1 year ago. So if the present circumstances persist, and unfortunately it seems that it will be very difficult to have peace back in all the region, how we should imagine to have economy recovery in this area? What is your idea on that?
Is this working? Yeah, it's working. You know, I returned to the region. I was living abroad for a very long time, for 15 years, and I returned to the region last year, 2014. And one of the things I remember when I moved to Europe, actually, that I realized very shortly after my move that the biggest difference between being in Europe and being in the Middle East, that actually you can have a dream in Europe and you can realize it. So with that, I think I will try to answer so we can dream about a different economy in the Middle East. We will try to do that. But if you allow me, I'm going to try to use my time to answer your question, but also to share some of the reflections I have on what I heard yesterday and today, because there are some very interesting points that were put forward yesterday with the Italian Prime Minister, the King of Jordan, and today in a number of also discussions which were quite thought-provoking. So on the economy, obviously security situation is extremely difficult, and like you said, I don't see a resolution of this very soon. There are also, when we look at the region, you always think about the Gulf states or the oil-producing, oil-exporting economies and the non-oil exporting economies. Both have challenges right now, and for different reasons, but they do have challenges. It seems that let's talk about the oil exporting very quickly. The ones in the Gulf in particular, they seem to have also themselves different paces of development. So you have countries like United Arab Emirates, which has been very serious about diversifying its economy. It has a young leadership, extremely dynamic. It has proven itself in Dubai as a model for development in the Arab world, etc. And I think they are the ones actually with the least risk, so to speak. And then you have Saudi Arabia with a different model, is extremely classic, very, very conservative, and so on. And I think they stand to suffer more with the continued, decline of oil prices and consumption of oil, of course, because the global economy is still slow. So the challenges there is actually how to cut government spending, which is very excessively high. while maintaining political stability. This is a huge challenge. I don't think we have the time to try to propose answers here, but this is just to shed some light on that. If you look at the rest of the region, which Libya, of course, is a different situation. It used to be an oil exporter, but it's a different situation. And Algeria seems to be also more or less like the Gulf states. Non-oil exporters, I think of Egypt and Jordan. You know, I think let's take a case of Egypt in particular. I mean, it's very, very quickly the Egyptian economy could do well, despite of all the challenges of security in the region, but requires some important transformation in the way the macroeconomic situation, speaking on prices of foreign exchange, of government borrowing, on investment policies, on the role of the state in the economy. It could do extremely well if some bold decisions are made. Now, the challenge Egypt has is that every time there is a decision to be made, on such bold fronts, there is political capital being used, invested in that, because the transition or the institutions that remain in place from the past are still strong. People with vested interest, groups with vested interest are still very strong, and they are able to challenge the reform required to move from the current economic structure to a new, more dynamic, more competitive, and more open one. There are scenarios where one can see political decisions being made in making these bold reforms and gaining grounds. I mean, education, we spoke about education quite a bit here. Just very quickly as one example on that, education, there are many segments within the education system that benefit tremendously. A lot of money is being made in black markets, in private tutoring, in book printing, huge amounts of money. It's actually equal to that of the government spending, I mean, 1-to-1, pound to pound, or dollar to dollar. Yet the beneficiaries of this black market are numbered. There are quite a few, but they're organized, they're vocal, they are able to mobilize popular street uprisings if necessary by putting money in it. But the numbers remain limited, and the beneficiaries of a reform are actually way outnumber them, and they are the people, the citizens of the country, the young, the families, the 19 million students that are in the education system, with families that around 10 million families. The political possibility of gaining political support and recreating political capital for a president in a case of making a tough decision of reforming education, obviously the case is very clear. If you go for the numbers, if you go for popular support, you can win. It just needs a bit of leadership, a bit of sight, and also some wisdom or some coalition that hopefully will be found in society. Now, can I move to my thoughts on what I heard very quickly? I will do it in less 2 minutes. 1 minute? 2 minutes, please. You know, it is connected to the relationship in the Mediterranean context, the relationship between Europe and North Africa and the region in particular. And I've been involved in this for at least 2 decades now. And we all know we have very little success in the neighborhood policies in the Barcelona process and the RomeMED. I mean, really very little success at all. And very simply speaking, because the point of departure of this entire relationship from the north and the south of the Mediterranean has been misinformed by a simple premise that is the problem of the young Arabs are to find decent jobs in their homes, and therefore look at the development agenda, try to promote trade, investment, and people will stay home and everything will be fine. I think this is a major mistake. Now, I know I'm not saying something new, because I think that's actually the becoming the wisdom in Brussels, that this is a mistake. It's not the case, that there is more about dignity and human rights and property rights and opportunities and dreams. Yet, when I listen to the revisions on the new concepts emerging from the revisions of the neighborhood policy, I don't see anything different. And it's really quite striking. And I hear it again today, but I heard very interestingly the one that the Prime Minister of Italy put forward, I think is very fresh, a lot of good things in it. Yet many of the Arab voices that were present, I think were saying something that we already heard before. So in a very modest way, I'm going to suggest a framework for going forward. It is a framework having to do with understanding the common risks that face the North and the South. It's about partnership. It's about every party playing up to their responsibility and having a role, because there are common risks that face all of us, from the North and of the South of the Mediterranean. So there are risks. I mean, inequality is one, terrorism and fundamentalism is one, and governance is another. Quite a few. Water resources, resources in general, scarcity, climate change. Everybody is faced the same risks. So in framing the relationship in a frame of risks, of looking at risks and how the two partners, or the number of partners within the equation, could work together to improve resilience of the two sides of the Mediterranean, I think is the way to see things. Because we cannot do things business as usual anymore. It needs to be. Plus, I would add another dimension to this, which also came across very clearly, and you mentioned it today. I'm sorry, I overdone my time. It's actually engaging all stakeholders. It's not about the state only. It's not about state to state. It has to be serious engagement of all stakeholders. The people, the civil society, the media, the parliamentarians, the business community, everybody has to be part of this new framework of increasing resilience and dealing with risks. And it's not fixed. It's actually alliances that have to do with risks, and different parties can play different roles. And I will stop there because I think I way exceeded my time. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, Sherif. Thanks a lot. You know, my main target as a moderator of this panel, being at this time of the day, is to have nobody sleep during our speeches. And I counted only one until now, falling asleep. So I think it's a good rate. So we may go on if we may take this. I switched to Europe because I have now Richard Youngs, Senior Associate from Carnegie Europe, from whom I would have liked to have soon his idea about the role that Europe may play and which Europe. But he asked me to delay this question to the later round. So for the ones that want to know about that, you have to be patient. And start, on the contrary, from a more general idea of what outside countries may contribute with respect to the trajectory, possibly democratic trajectory of the Arab countries after the Arab Springs.
Yes, we're asked in this session to reflect on this question of transforming governments and institutions. And one understands that most of the debate is focused obviously on Islamic State and Syria at the moment. But it strikes me that there is this broader overarching question of whether there's any possibility of political reform across the region more in general, which is, I mean, if we're talking about Mediterranean dialogues, then surely we need to take that into consideration, whether there's any life left in the Arab Spring or not. I don't think there's any easy single answer to that question. I don't think there's any Middle Eastern specificity, actually, when we debate the possibilities of democracy building. In the region today, we have pretty much every single type of political regime. We have some countries that have not opened up politically at all. We have some liberalized autocracies. We have some countries where the state has basically imploded and there's no basic governing capacity left at all. And then we probably have one country where we're talking about the challenge of deepening kind of post-transition democratic quality. So there's no single set of issues that we have to address when we're talking about democracy building. In response to the question of whether outside actors can play a role, I think they can. I don't think it's a decisive role. I think even if the EU were completely to perfect its policies, that it is going to be the decisive factor in determining the political future of the region. But I think the EU and US and other actors can do more to encourage some degree of change, and at least to make sure that they're not making it more difficult for those in the region who do want to see some degree of political liberalization. The question of whether there's any life left in the Arab Spring, I do think that in many parts of the region, the situation is that although regimes have pushed back in many cases against political opening, the basic structural reasons for why the revolts took place in 2011 have not been addressed. They have not been addressed either by governments that have implemented reforms or those that have resisted reform. The situation, rather, as far as I see it, is you've got a lot of civic frustration, a lot of civic activity going on, but it's very kind of diffuse and amorphous in nature. I think one key lesson of the last 5 years is that it's very difficult, or the Middle East has shown that it's very difficult for these very kind of fluid social movements and revolts to channel their demands into long-term mainstream politics. What's the implication of that for outside actors? I think it means that, we often advocate that the EU needs to do more to support civil society. That may be the case, but it seems to me it's not simply a case of doing more to support civil society. It's understanding which actors we should actually be engaging with within civil society and how we find new ways of engaging with a civil society that itself is undergoing quite profound changes within the region. I think it's also the case that it's not simply civil society. Often when we debate political reform, we end up talking mainly about civil society. I think one of the real Achilles heels of the region is that political parties are not very well developed, and there's this lack of very programmatic parties capable of putting forward really coherent agendas, or that have very organic links with their own electorates, with their own citizens. So I think, I can go into more detail of these are basically the kinds of challenges we need to be addressing from the outside. Also addressing this very curious paradox, it seems to me, that most Middle Eastern states are both too weak and too centralized. They're too weak effectively to deliver services to their citizens, but also too centralized to be fully accountable. So I think that means we need to help build state capacity, but also make sure that it's very accountable capacity at the same time. To finish off on the EU and what type of EU policy we need, my impression of the latest, the new neighborhood policy document is a little bit more favorable. I think there are some changes that may be in the pipeline. There does seem to be, in particular, there's more talk about differentiation between different states that I think it means that, no, but at least it formalizes perhaps what's already been done in practice over the last 4 or 5 years. I think my impression is that's good news for democracy building if it means the EU mobilizing resources and diplomatic leverage to support countries like Tunisia where there is a real commitment to reform. It's not such good news if it means the EU turning away from countries that perhaps today don't want a very deep partnership with the EU, but where civil society and other actors are in real danger of being repressed and facing very, very difficult circumstances. And I think there, rather than the EU stepping back and doing less, in a way we need to be doing more to protect actors that are in a very, very precarious situation. I think my final word would be, one understands that today it's all about security, and that here we're debating mainly a kind of shared area of security. It just seems to me that the key issue is what we understand by security. If we're talking about citizen security, then it seems to me that's perfectly understandable and positive. There needs to be a degree of security before democratic reform becomes possible. If we're going back to a situation where we're only talking about state-to-state security, then I think that's more problematic for democracy building. And in a way there, I think we run the risk of repeating some of the mistakes we made in the 1990s and the early 2000s that I think we should have learned by now simply don't lead to very sustainable long-term security.
Thank you, Richard. Now, for the many that know Emma Bonino, they can understand that it's impossible for me to really moderate her. But I
am a disciplined person.
I know that. But I could understand already from your body language what you agreed and what you disagreed while we were speaking. But let me try at least to make one question, and then I leave you the floor. taking and quoting Marina from the readings that I was doing while preparing here and this panel, and so I was reading one of her statements saying that in most transitions things get worse before they get better. So it seems this has happened also in the post-Arab Springs. Emma, do you think this is because there has been a lack of leadership among the opponents, or probably it's more complex?
No, I simply think that when all the mood started, there was in many places the illusion that 24 hours, Ben Ali goes, the other one that don't go will kill them, and the next day, democracy is booming, flowers are blooming, and sun is shining, and et cetera, et cetera. That was a terrible illusion that we, in some way, also infused in the people and in the young people who had already this illusion, but we nurtured this illusion even more. And of course, it would have never, ever been possible to be like this. If there is one of the books that the most telling to me, that was a book by Stephen Grant, by the way, that is around, who wrote a book soon later, Understanding Tahrir Square. And he simply said, in everywhere in the world, moving toward democracy took at least 20 years. Look at the Balkans. Look at Latin America. Look at Asia. And during the 20 years, it has been 2 steps forwards, 3 backwards, one on the right, one on the left. So, because democracy is a process, it's not an event. And I think that if this is the reading, which I do share, you have some consequences, not only in 2011, but even for later on what is happening now. What I strongly believe is that, of course, security for the moment is dominating more or less everything. We have even forgotten the migrants, at least in some part of the European media. Apparently, they are not an emergency anymore. They are still dying. I think that the Coastal Guard saved 5,000 in the last weekend, 5,000. But it's not even, definitely is not front page, definitely is not on the move. I was yesterday in one of the European member states, which is most anti-immigrant and mostly, just to discover, to my great surprise, that they have 500 registered migrants this year. And they are the most vocal anti-migrants through Europe, just to discover that they don't have migrants. But on the contrary, in the last years, 400,000 of young people from this country, that by the way is Hungary, have left Hungary throughout the world, mostly in Europe, looking for a better life, better employment, and so on and so forth. So now they have, like us, by the way, a big demographic crisis, like Germany, like us, like Bulgaria. But they have left in 400,000, and now they are the most vocal. Maybe not non-registered, maybe there are 2,000 migrants, but registered, officially speaking, they have few hundreds. Which means, just saying that we also from our side of the world, we are forgetting, and we move from one emergency to the other. For instance, we have forgotten that there is a sort of economic crisis still looming in Greece. I am pretty sure it's not over. And it will be back very soon. And hopes, we will discover, surprise, surprise, that it was not over. Then spring will come. And hopes, surprise, surprise, we will discover that the migrants will come again. But in the meantime, very little we have been doing on both sides, let alone on security. I've been trying uselessly to draw the attention that for instance, today people were mentioning, Lavrov were mentioning Yemen and so on. Yemen is a failed state, more or less. 160,000 refugees just left in 2015, moving to Djibouti. Whoever knows Djibouti knows that they will not stay in Djibouti, right? It's impossible to stay in Djibouti. And they are already moving in Somaliland, through Somaliland, Ethiopia, and we will find them, of course, in Libya. So I'm just saying that we are moving from Europe, moving from an emergency to another without focusing on long-term. Everybody is calling on long-term policy, but basically we are moving from a day-by-day emergency / policy. I think, just to say, because we talk institution, as a radical, as a liberal, I really very much, I think very much that institutions are very important. People pass and go, institutions remain. And if you are wrong in establishing long-term institution, then you are in trouble. From my point of view, and I'm speaking here, and I want to touch on your new neighbor policy and the more optimistic way that you were portraying it. And I'm talking under the attention of my former colleagues that was Commissioner for Enlargement. I do strongly believe that time has come to separate neighborhood policy on Eastern neighborhood policy and Southern neighborhood policy. I've been claiming over and over all this summer when they were preparing the new commission, please split these two neighborhoods. The policies are totally different. People and countries are in a different stage of their own transformation. We need to, it's not only a question of flexibility, what is the wording used in the, not flexibility.
Differentiation.
Differentiation. It's not only a question of differentiation. It goes much deeper than that. It goes from 2 points of view. One is political, people need to know to whom they have to talk. And in policy, when you have a priority, you normally put forward a person in charge, a budget, a structure. Just to make it very clear what is the priority you want to have. And I think that it's important, and I hope that we will do it, I don't know when, but to separate the two responsibilities, simply because it's two different kind of region. It's not our fault, it's not their fault. It happens that it is like that. And our country in different level of transition and of transformation. The second point on the new neighborhood policy is that I think we have to change a sort of a paradigm. First of all, because there is not such a thing as a European policy. Most of that, there is not such a thing as Arab policy. So we are calling on the Mediterranean region, but at the end of the day, the European side doesn't have a common policy, but that is not new, But also the Arab side, so let's say the South Mediterranean side are not homogeneous at all, at all. It's even less connected, right? If you have to fly from Cairo to Rabat, you go to Paris. No, it's true. Otherwise, you sleep one night, I don't know where, okay? So what I do think is that having in the prospect, of course, the Mediterranean, the illusion of Barcelona. Barcelona was, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe 1995 was possible. Only we have to take stakes of what we do in 2015, right? I don't think it was a total failure. I simply think that we have to understand what has happened and what we need now. For instance, I don't think we have to wait that everybody agrees on something to move forward. If you really around the table and just because, for instance, Algeria and Morocco, they have the border closed. Israeli and Palestinian, they never sit down together. So I am afraid, and I think that in this more flexible or different policy, we have really to focus on countries that do really have a willingness and an interest to have a partnership with us. It's very difficult to have a partnership, for instance, just to name, with Algeria that don't have a European aspiration, frankly speaking, for their history, their culture, their story. In this moment, with due respect, our Egyptian friends are attracted by other systems and not by basically European integration, deep integration. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Tunisia, on the contrary, is is a country that really is interested. Morocco is another one. So I think also it's not only differentiation, I think also that we have to focus on countries that share this need of partnership because they share the threat, they share the analysis, and they also share their ambition. Finally, just on Europe again, because sometimes I'm really fed up to be the kind of people who go around teaching everybody else what they have to do. And I get very nervous when we, on the contrary, are not able to do our job at home. In so doing, losing a lot of credibility. As Marina said, I do understand why it is so difficult to have a common European intelligence. But without that, frankly, we cannot claim that we are serious on security. These kind of groups of lone wolf or these kind of things is not somebody that you can prevent putting a policeman behind every citizen. It comes with intelligence, with good connections. But we will not do it, right? Even if we know as Europeans that it is so important, mistrust among member states will prevent a common intelligence service, as it is being prevented up to now, a foreign policy or let alone a defense policy. So I think that we have to adjust governance at the institution on the two sides, and leaving aside and learning lessons from the past, going country by country, sharing partnership when it is possible, not wait for everybody to agree around the table because otherwise we go nowhere, and have a clear mandate and a clear-cut point of reference for all the people in the South Mediterranean that want to have a dialogue with Europe.
Thank you, Emma. About intelligence, I must say I had a meeting with a judge dealing with that, with information, an Italian judge, that told me that 80% of information about Italy is coming from United States.
Yes.
2% from France, 2% from UK, and 12% from France, 2% from UK, and 4% from Israel. That means that if we were to, and only so the remaining 2% from Italy itself, that means that if we decide to have a common intelligence, a European intelligence, we may possibly negotiate with the United States to have some more information, because otherwise we are hopeless. Absolutely. So,
no, if you listen to we have a European coordinator anti-terrorism. I think he was here.
Today, yes.
He was here. And if you talk to him, poor one, he is simply desperate.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
I was very young when colleagues of mine, and I stop here, when I asked, well, you know, because it was not the first time we have a security problem.
Yeah.
Balkans, infiltration was...
Yeah.
And I asked at that time. And the answer was always the same. Sorry? You really think that I give my intelligence to this Romanian? They will sell it immediately to Russia, and so no way. But that was just not a joke.
Yeah.
Because UK will tell you the same, France will tell you the same.
Yeah.
The result is that we wait from triangular US information.
If I can just add one.
Sure.
With different US agencies not necessarily talking to each other.
Yes.
Because 9/11 was missed, the plot was missed, because the CIA and the FBI
Like the 6
were not
bodies
communicating.
of the police in Brussels. In
it's
Brussels, there are 6 different bodies for police.
So that Marina gave us is a very bad news, because we were hoping in a federal union in Europe was solving all the problems, but here we know that it's not exactly the case. Let's go for a second quick round, maybe on more specific questions. I start again from Marina, because we have elaborated on the difficulty of developing democracies after revolutions. You were mentioning the 20 years average time, but is there any specific idiosyncrasy in the Arab world towards democracy that should we add to our analysis after the Arab Spring's experience?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. If you mean, is there something specific to the Arab world that make it more difficult to have democracy? I would say no. It's just the same. I mean, I think the literature is very clear here. The studies are very clear. Democratic transition usually fail the first time and the first attempt. Somebody, I think it was Berkat, that mentioned 1848 today. The first attempts at democracy have failed completely. The French Revolution failed. I mean, and took them a very long time to get to that point. So what I would argue is that what we are looking now is the difficulties of establishing democracy in countries without a prior experience of democracy. The question is, what do we do now? Because to say, one thing is to say, well, it will take time, there will be another wave of democratization and some countries will make, and in the meantime, we sit on our hands. And the other one is to say, what can we do right here and now? And I totally agree with Emma Bonino when she says, let's start working with countries that seem to be more willing, more receptive, that seems to have, where there is something to work with. And let's work with those countries without any delusion of omnipotence. I do worry a lot about how we talk, and this is a collective we. It's not just Europe, it's the United States, is what many call the democracy industry, as if we knew how to create institutions, as if we knew how to create a civil society, as if we knew how to create political parties. We are very good at the little technical steps, but that does not need that we are putting together, that we are successful in this. In Iraq, the National Democratic Institute, which is the organization related to the Democratic Party, took it on its